Alrighty. So First Republic Bank's stock is down another 29% today. It's down to like in the fives, 569 I think is where it closed at 4 o'clock. It's now right about 5 o'clock as I'm recording this. But I'm not going to talk about First Republic and the stock market again. I think the next time I'll address First Republic will be when they go under. If a couple weeks goes by and they don't go under, I'll do an update and say, hey, I was wrong. But for now, I want to turn my attention to a topic that was one of the first that I ever addressed on this channel, and that was Juan Guaido and his attempted coup in Venezuela. I think it was either the second or the third video that I ever put out on this channel was on Juan Guaido. And I don't remember what I said, but I know that my opinion on Juan Guaido has not changed since 2019 when I started this channel. And I just want to do a little victory lap today, because all of us who laughed at the media and the CIA's attempt to legitimize Juan Guaido and convince us, the American public, as well as the world at large, that he was the legitimate president of Venezuela, even though he never even ran for president, let alone was elected president. He just was president by CIA decree. That fiction, it really fizzled out. It took a few years, but Juan Guaido is over. I can say that officially now. Not only has he left Venezuela, he has landed, he's touched down in Miami and was spotted in Miami International Airport with no entourage, no fanfare, no press conference. He's not leading a government in exile. He's just exiled himself to probably live out the rest of his days in the lap of luxury in Miami. He likely will join some kind of think tank and talk about how Maduro is bad for the next 40 years. And then, he'll live a very cushy life with his family. His kids, who I assume are probably pretty young if he has any, they'll grow up living in Miami, and they'll have a much nicer life than they would have, I think, living as rich folks in Venezuela, probably. They'll get to live as rich folks in America. I'd rather be a rich person in America than Venezuela, personally. After all, the Venezuelan government, their history with dealing with the rich folks, I wouldn't be too comfortable there. But it's not like, I have to say, before I get too off track, the Venezuelan government, far less authoritarian than I would have ever expected. It's funny how the U.S., in trying to convince us that Venezuela is an authoritarian dictatorship, actually ended up making Venezuela look much better and improving my opinion of Venezuela. And I think improving the opinions of a lot of people, because what Juan Guaido did, his insurrection, which was sponsored by the Trump administration, championed first and foremost by National Security Advisor John Bolton, his putsch was way beyond anything that January 6th did. January 6th was some unruly Trump supporters who were mad about election integrity. The Juan Guaido putsch was about like 22 soldiers trying to launch a military coup against the Venezuelan government. There were tanks in the streets and pandemonium, and it was put down almost immediately. I watched it happen. It was a true insurrection that was sponsored by a foreign government, no less. Unlike January 6th, which was sponsored by our own government, it was a phony, domestically funded insurrection. Well, this was a foreign-funded and foreign-backed and foreign-planned insurrection. And what happened to Juan Guaido as a result? Well, nothing for a long time. He just went on living in Venezuela as a clown because, believe it or not, when your government is seen as legitimate by the populace. You don't need to jail your political opponents. You don't need to disappear them. You don't need to assassinate them, because the citizens will just see them as clowns. That's what happened to Juan Guaido. He wasn't martyred. They didn't take the bait. They didn't take Juan Guaido and throw him in prison. They just let him keep living there until he was so miserable because nobody took him seriously, and everyone, just saw him as a laughingstock, as this phony, Spanish-speaking Obama, and who was straight out of central casting, that he eventually just left. They hurt his feelings. That's what happened. They bullied him into leaving. I mean, who could remember? I mean, the bottom, rock bottom for Juan Guaido was when he went out to eat at that chicken restaurant, and the patrons just started throwing food at him because he was a circus freak. They were saying, "Get out! We don't like you." I don't think the restaurant did that. I think the restaurant served him. But the other patrons and this was not a high-end restaurant. This was a open air. I think it was screened in, but it was it wasn't air conditioned. It wasn't. It was pretty casual place, and they just started throwing their food at him and throwing plates at him. I think they were paper plates. It wasn't anything too serious. And that just showed, he was not a popular guy. And so I think he'll be much happier living here. He'll be with his own kind. He'll be with other CIA agents. And to be fair, there are a lot of anti-government Venezuelans living in Miami, and I welcome them because they vote the right way. They have the right politics. I don't disagree with the politics of these people who don't like the Venezuelan government. I don't like the politics of the Venezuelan government. It's just that they are not the majority down there. They're not. There's not popular support for someone like Juan Guaido. And I think he'll probably he will find a community that appreciates him in Florida. By that I mean other Venezuelan expats. He's not the first. I mean, look at Castro's in-laws, the Diaz-Balart family. There's a congressman actually by the name of Diaz-Balart. I believe he was one of Castro's nephews. But the family of Castro's first wife, they all fled Cuba. They didn't like Castro. And, they found a community of like-minded Cubans down in Miami, and they, built a new life as Americans. And so, I think this could easily be seen as a happy ending. The guy didn't get skewered. I would not have been, chuckling and laughing if the Venezuelan government had tried him for treason, which he's certainly guilty of, and sentenced him to death, because, that's what would have happened if he was in America. If we tried this crap here, if Venezuela tried to back an insurrection against the U.S. government, the way that the U.S. backed Juan Guaido's insurrection against the Venezuelan government, everyone involved would be spending the rest of their life in prison. Just like those 4 unfortunate black people who are being accused of Russia collusion. They were arrested, and they're facing 10 years in prison for Russia collusion because they opposed the war in Ukraine. That is a risk that we Americans face now. If we oppose a foreign war, which our country isn't even officially involved in, okay, so get this, Ukraine war, or U.S. is not officially at war in Ukraine. It's all under the table. It's all clandestine. You oppose that, you oppose an illegal war, a war that is against our own laws, our own Constitution. You will be jailed as a traitor to the enemy. And yet I'm supposed to believe that Maduro is the dictator and Venezuela is the authoritarian state that I should really be worried about. This is what the likes of Marco Rubio tell us and Rick Scott. Where are Marco Rubio and Rick Scott fighting for the civil liberties of their own citizens in St. Petersburg, who are rotting in jail for the accused crime of Russia collusion? These people were not prominent. They were nobodies. They were some splinter organization of some black nationalist group. These are not influential people by any means. And so if they're going to throw them in prison, they'll do that to any of us. I could be next. I'm as irrelevant as they are. And what's the loophole that they're using to try and trump up charges against them? They're saying, well, they took money. Somebody donated money to their group, and that group who donated money to them is connected to Russia. They're going to say. And so I guess if you take money from someone, you better ask them, hey, where'd you get this money from? You better not have gotten it from any dirty Russians. So ironically, Juan Guaido, the freedom fighter, we're told, from Venezuela, has moved to an arguably more authoritarian country. Oh, and by the way, just to clarify, I said earlier that these four black people, these black nationalists, were from St. Petersburg. I meant St. Petersburg, Florida, not St. Petersburg, Russia. They are not Russian by any means. Yet, they are facing prison time and have already been jailed because they are traitors to the Russian menace. Welcome home, Juan Guaido. If you continue to just repeat whatever the CIA tells you, if you just always go along with whatever the CIA says, you're going to do great in this country. I mean it. You're set for life. They're going to set you up, I bet, in a nice condo with a view of Biscayne Bay. And they'll trot you out to fundraisers and stuff, and the local Republicans will just love you. You'll be a rock star because they'll have you up, they'll hold you up as a prop, to appeal to the Venezuelan expat community, and I'm not saying that would be degrading. I mean, it might be a very comfortable existence. Just don't ever cross the CIA, or else you will end up like these black nationalists. Rotting in prison. What was the old promise of America? If you work hard and stick around, you'll get ahead. Now the promise of America is do as the CIA says, and they'll let you live without throwing you in prison. That's the new promise of America. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.